system in Chongqing. They've always abandoned their plans though. The project just didn't seem feasible. In the 70s and 80s,
if China fights India, I support China because I'm Chinese. If America fights India, I support India because I'm Asian. If America fights aliens, I support America because I'm human. If aliens fight Japan, I support aliens. That's crazy. That's crazy.
metros were constructed in Beijing and Shanghai, but Chongqing, nothing. The project was too difficult from a technical perspective and way too expensive as well. But things changed towards the end of the 1980s when a new task force was put into place. This task force was serious about getting this done and spent the next few years traveling abroad, inspecting metros in other countries, and learning as much as possible about building railways in difficult vertical spaces. One of the first things they realized was that a conventional railway probably wasn't the best option. By conventional here, we just mean a flat set of tracks, like the ones you see in most subways. That's what China
I don't understand. So they sent a task force out and the task force actually forced a task instead of simply just sitting around and collecting cash and then not getting anything done. This doesn't make any sense. At what point does the private public partnership kick in where the private enterprise simply just uses the government as a money cannon? That they fill a pool with yuans and then they dive into the pool instead of actually taking the money and then building the railroads. I don't get it.
Used for the metro in Beijing and also the metro in Shanghai. That's what you see in the London Underground or the subway system in New York. But the task force came up with an alternative. How about using monorails? Here's the thing, a monorail track is way lighter than a conventional rail track. And if you're building lots of elevated tracks and bridges, the system needs fewer supports. The task force worked out that a conventional metro, like the one in Beijing, would cost more than $200 million per kilometer of rail. But a monorail metro would cost half as much, more like $100 million per kilometer. Monorails are also more energy efficient than conventional rails. Again, the task force worked out that a station using conventional tracks would use about 10 times as much energy as a station that used monorail tracks. Monorail systems are also better at tight turns and climbing steep slopes. In other words, using monorails in Chongqing felt a bit like a no-brainer. Okay, so you're probably wondering, if monorails are so great, why doesn't everyone just use them? Well, the thing is, a monorail only really makes sense if you're building an elevated metro. If you're building an underground rail system, it is a totally different story. While a monorail is lighter than a conventional system, it actually takes up more vertical space. A conventional system uses low, flat rails with the trains just riding on top, but a monorail system uses one tall rail, which the trains can...
This is making me more depressed than the BBB. Yeah, I'm really driving a fucking nail in the coffin here. This is insult to injury time, you know what I mean? I know it's messed up. Wait, hold on. My buddy's here.
Straddle on both sides. Now, typically, metros use a lot of tunnels dug out beneath a city's streets. And if you're excavating tunnels, the last thing that you want is a rail that takes up more space. That means digging higher tunnels, which takes time and money. So in the majority of cases, monorail metros are actually a pretty bad idea. But not for Chongqing. In this 8D city, monorails made perfect sense. But the project still wouldn't be easy. Usually, when you build an elevated rail, you'd build the support columns first, and then use cranes to lower each piece of monorail into position. But in Chongqing, that wasn't really an option. With all the narrow streets, and slopes, and drops, it was hard enough for a person to move around, let alone something as large and precarious as a crane. Now, luckily, the task force had an answer. They developed a specialist beam transport machine, carefully designed for this specific task. The machine would hug a piece of rail to its belly, crawl onto the support columns, and then lay the rail.
Oh, I'm nutting. Bro, this is fucking crazy. Oh, that's so sick. What the fuck?
Into place. It was a long time coming, but in December of 2000, these machines were put into action. Just 5 years later, the first line of the metro was officially open to the public. Line 2, as it's known, was mostly elevated above the city streets, although a couple kilometers did run underground at one end. This very first line is actually the one that passes through those apartment buildings from earlier in the video. When this line was being built, this piece of land was actually owned by a construction company. They hadn't built anything yet, but they were planning to, and that building was going to get in the way of the rail. In the end, the company worked with the metro to design a building with which the metro could safely intersect. To do this, the designers needed to make sure that the vibrations passing through the monorail line didn't damage the rest of the building. That is quite a bit of engineering. We'll see exactly how they did it in a second. But real quick first, if you're enjoying this video and you want to see similar content in the future, don't forget to subscribe to Megabuilds. Anyways, back to the Metro. So how did they make sure that—
Dude, I don't care what system makes this, I want it, okay? You can call it whatever you want. Call it socialism, call it omega capitalism. I don't give a shit. I want it, dude. I fucking want it. I want it so fucking bad. Dude, think about that. Like, we could have this, dude. We could have this. We could have this in the United States of America. Fuck.
the vibrating monorail didn't damage the building that it was going through? The construction team put these vertical tubes within the inner structure of the building. The monorail stood on pillars, each one at the center of these tubes. And the tubes were wide enough that when the pillars vibrated, there was no chance of them touching the sides. By the way, in case you were wondering, monorails are also much quieter than conventional rails. For the people living in the apartment block, the sound—
I'm sorry, whatever system that allows this to happen is superior. I'll say it. I don't give a fuck. Oh, one party rule. I don't care. Okay. Oh, eminent domain. This is crazy. This is like, no, it's superior. Okay. No, Fiona. No, what are you doing? Why? Here, chill out. She's just like pushing the gate. You're a little train slut, aren't you? Yes, I am going to the face party in a second. I'm going to end the stream after this video and then go.
sound of the train is about 60 decibels, which is pretty close to the same as a dishwasher. So annoying, but not too bad. After successfully finishing the monorail line, the construction teams kept going. After a few years, another monorail line was completed. This second line was a record.
By the way, China has like simultaneously some very interesting home ownership rules, like land ownership rules where the government basically owns everything and it's like a lease agreement. But it also has some of the craziest, most ridiculous land protections that you have ever seen, which is why there's like a bunch of different places where in China, like you literally have homes that are just built around like a fucking highway, for example, where on the one hand, it's a 99-year lease, and I guess instead of like having the bank own your home, you literally own your home. The government owns everybody's homes, including yours, and you can and you go through this process where they just like give it back to you by the end of it if you're ever near the end of it. But it's not the home built around the highway; it's the highway built around the home. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But also at the same time, like the way it works, from what I understand, is like the government comes to you and they're like, "We're going to build a massive project here, and this requires us to move you to a different place." They will offer a higher price than market rate for the house, and on top of that, price you into like price relocation fees into it as well. And if the person still says no, then they just literally build around it. They're like, all right, fuck it, we'll just build around it. Yeah, you get a better upgrade if the government has to take your house. Yeah, I know. They pay for the new home, and and they give you money, like they give you above market rate for the house that they're taking out, and also on top of that, they pay for the relocation and everything. Chinese man defies demolition orders to build 10-story Ghibli nail house. Rural areas are basically communes for housing ownership. The whole village owns a house as a community and builds if someone needs a home. It's 70 years. They offer a renew of the lease for a further 70 years. If you pay 1% of the land value, there's no annual land tax in China. Yeah. Bulldozing buildings was my brother's main argument against China's authoritarian government. I mean, they used to do that for sure.